Ever feel like your own brain is working against you? Like it's just this hamster wheel of thoughts and you can't get off.
Oh, tell me about it.
Well, get ready to dive into the idea of non-thinking as a path to peace and fulfillment.
Okay.
We're taking Joseph Nguyen's book, Don't Believe Everything You Think, as our guide today.
Yeah, no, you know, what I find fascinating about Nguyen's approach is how he takes this concept that, it could sound kind of esoteric, but he makes it so practical.
Right.
Like he blends, ancient wisdom with modern psychology, physics even, to help us understand how our thoughts literally create our reality.
Right. It's not just some mystical mumbo jumbo. So for someone who's like brand new to this whole non-thinking thing, where does Nguyen even begin?
He dives right in with this idea that it's not actually the external events that are causing us stress, but it's our own reactions to them, our thoughts, essentially.
Okay, but how much control do we really have over our thoughts? Like stuff just pops into my head all the time.
Exactly. And Nguyen uses this brilliant Zen story to illustrate this point. Picture this. There's this young monk,
Uh-huh.
and he's trying to meditate, but he's constantly distracted by like noises,
Yeah.
animals, you name it. He's convinced if he can just find a perfectly silent place, he'll finally find that inner peace he's looking for.
So he goes to, let me guess, the middle of a lake.
You got it. He rows out to the middle of the lake, all set for some uninterrupted meditation, and wouldn't you know it, another empty boat comes drifting right into his path.
Oh, no. Did he lose it?
He totally flipped out. But here's the kicker. It was only when he realized there was no one else to blame but himself, like he was the one who got angry, that's when it all kind of started to dissipate.
Whoa, so he created the anger himself. It wasn't actually the boat's fault at all.
Exactly. And that's the crux of it. It's not the external event, what he calls the first arrow, but our internal reaction to it, the second arrow, that causes suffering.
Okay.
And get this, that second arrow, totally optional.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going, but how do we actually stop ourselves from, like, firing that second arrow in the first place?
Well, Nangun makes this really key distinction between thoughts and thinking. So thoughts, those are those fleeting things, right? They just kind of pop up in our minds like bubbles in a fish tank. It's only when we engage in thinking, the judging, the analyzing, getting all wrapped up in them, that they become a problem.
So it's not about emptying our minds completely, which honestly just sounds impossible.
Right. We don't want to be zombies, right?
Right.
It's about choosing which thoughts we're going to engage with and which ones we can just kind of let pass by without judgment.
Can you give me an example? Like, how can we tell the difference?
Okay, so let's say you have a thought like, I wish I was more outgoing.
Yeah.
That in itself, not a problem. It's just a thought. But if you start dwelling on it, thinking, why am I so shy? What's wrong with me? That's when you spiral into that negativity.
Okay, I see. So it's like acknowledging the thought, there's that insecurity again, but not letting it, like, take over my entire day.
Exactly.
But if our natural state isn't, this overthinking mess, then what is it, according to Nguyen?
He believes that beneath all that mental noise, our natural state is actually one of peace, love, and joy.
Seriously. I mean, that's a bold claim. If that's true, then why are so many of us, not walking around blissed out all the time?
Well, think about a baby.
Okay.
When they're not hungry, tired, or uncomfortable, they're generally pretty content, right?
Yeah.
Smiling, giggling, open to new experiences. It's only as we grow older and start to internalize messages from, the world around us that we start to layer on all this thinking that obscures that innate peace.
Okay, that makes sense. But if this thinking is the culprit, how do we actually quiet it down? I mean, we can't just tell our brains to shut off, can we?
You're right. It's not like flipping a switch. And it's not about, emptying our minds completely.
Yeah.
Nguyen uses this analogy of a glass of murky water.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Go on.
You can try to force the dirt to settle by, like, stirring it up even more, right?
Yeah.
Trying to fight those thoughts head on.
Right.
Or you can just let it be, just observe.
Yeah.
And naturally, over time, that water's going to clear. And our minds are kind of similar in that way.
So instead of, like, getting frustrated at ourselves for having negative thoughts, we should just try to acknowledge them and let them pass without judgment. So is that what, like, non-thinking is all about?
You got it. He even compares it to quicksand. The more we struggle against it, the more stuck we become.
Ooh, nope.
And this is where things get really cool.
Yeah.
He brings in these mind-blowing concepts from modern physics to explain how this works.
All right, now you've got to elaborate on that physics. Tell me more.
Okay, so in quantum physics, the act of observation actually impacts what is observed, right?
Okay.
And our thoughts are kind of similar. They literally shape our perception of reality. He also highlights this idea that everything in the universe is fundamentally energy. And just like we can shift our physical energy from a state of agitation to a state of calmness, we can do the same with our mental energy, moving from a state of thinking to non-thinking.
Okay. So, like, if we actually get this whole non-thinking thing down, what does that even look like in our everyday lives? Like, does it mean we just become passive and float around in a Zen state all day? What about goals?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Nguyen is very clear. Non-thinking is not about becoming passive or giving up on goals altogether.
Yeah.
It's more about understanding what's driving those goals in the first place.
Okay.
He distinguishes between goals that are fueled by desperation versus those that are fueled by inspiration.
Okay, I'm hooked.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this whole desperation versus inspiration thing.
So goals that come from a place of desperation, those come from a place of lack, right?
Okay.
We set them because we feel like something is missing. It's that, like, I'll be happy when.
Yeah. Mentality.
I'll be happy when. Yes. When I get that promotion, when I make $1 million, when I find the perfect partner.
Ouch. Yeah, I think we've all been there. Chasing some external achievement to try to fill some kind of void.
Right. And the problem is, even if we do achieve those goals, that feeling of lack, it often comes back.
Yeah.
You just set the bar higher and then you're chasing the next thing, and it's exhausting.
Totally.
Yeah.
So what's the alternative? How do we tap into that inspiration-driven goal setting instead?
So goals fueled by inspiration come from a very different place. They arise from a sense of joy, abundance, a desire to create something meaningful. Think about like artists, musicians, inventors who are driven by a pure passion for their craft, not just for those external rewards or recognition.
Right. It's like they're creating for the joy of creation itself, not because they're trying to prove something or please anyone else.
Exactly. And Nguyen calls this unconditional creation. It's not about what we're going to get out of it. It's about expressing something that feels authentic, aligned with our true nature.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
But like, let's be real. How do we actually make that shift?
Yeah.
From desperation to inspiration? Because it's one thing to say, just stop thinking so much and follow your bliss. But our minds don't always cooperate.
You're telling me.
Right.
It's a practice, not a switch that we can just flip overnight.
Right.
But Nguyen offers some really practical advice here.
Yeah.
He suggests creating what he calls an activation ritual,
Okay.
which is essentially like a morning routine that helps to set the tone for the day and cultivate a state of non-thinking right from the get-go.
I am all about a good morning routine. What kind of things does he recommend?
It's very personalized, but it could include things like meditation, journaling, spending time in nature, really any activity that brings you joy and helps to kind of quiet the mind before the day's to-do list takes over.
So basically like hitting the pause button on the mental chaos before it even has a chance to start. Love it.
Exactly. And he emphasizes it's not about being perfect. We're all human. We're going to get caught up in thinking sometimes.
Right.
The key is just to simply become aware of it and gently redirect our attention back to the present moment without judgment.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
So we've talked about goals, but what about like decision-making in general? Does this non-thinking approach mean that we should just always throw logic out the window and just go with our gut?
That's where it gets really interesting. Nguyen's perspective on intuition is really nuanced.
Okay.
He definitely acknowledges the vital role of intuition,
Okay.
but he also emphasizes the importance of discernment, and he uses the analogy of a piano.
Okay. How does a piano relate to intuition and decision-making?
Well, there are no inherently wrong keys on a piano, right? But depending on the context, some combinations of notes are going to sound more harmonious than others.
Ah, I see. So it's not about just blindly following every single whim or gut feeling. It's about learning to listen to that inner voice, but also considering the bigger picture.
Precisely. And he's very clear that this isn't about becoming passive or indecisive. In fact, he argues that when we're free from the clutter of excessive thinking, we can actually become more decisive because we're able to tap into this deeper wisdom that's not clouded by fear or self-doubt.
Okay, this is all starting to sound amazing, but also a little daunting.
Yeah.
What about the challenges of embracing this way of being? Does Nguyen address that at all?
He's very upfront about the fact that it is a journey, not a destination. And he points out that one common obstacle is that we can actually get uncomfortable with feeling too peaceful.
Wait, really? Who gets uncomfortable with peace?
It sounds strange, but it's true.
Yeah.
Our minds are so used to, like, the drama of overthinking that quietude can actually feel kind of unsettling at first.
Like we're almost addicted to the chaos in a way.
Exactly. And he also points out that our ego, that part of us that identifies so strongly with our thoughts,
Right.
that can put up quite a fight. It wants to stay in control.
Yeah.
So it might try to convince us that we're losing our edge, becoming lazy, not taking life seriously enough if we're not constantly striving and thinking.
So how do we deal with those, like, ego backlashes when those thoughts inevitably start to creep in?
And Gian suggests a few things. First, just simply acknowledge those thoughts and feelings without judgment. Remember, they're just thoughts, they're not facts. Second, remind yourself that this discomfort is a natural part of the process of growth. Like we're stepping outside our comfort zone, and that can be, a little bit unnerving at times. And then third, return to the practices that cultivate non-thinking, whether that's your activation ritual, meditation, spending time in nature, whatever helps you to kind of reconnect with that inner stillness.
It's like we're retraining our minds to recognize that peace isn't the absence of activity, it's the presence of something much, much deeper.
Exactly. And Nguyen emphasizes, again, this is a practice. It's not like a perfect state that we achieve once and for all.
Right.
We're going to have moments of clarity. We're going to have moments where we get caught up in our thinking.
Yeah.
The key is to just keep returning to the present moment over and over again.
As you were talking, one thing that really stood out to me about the book is how Guyan kind of weaves in this idea of spirituality
Yeah.
without getting, like, preachy or dogmatic about it.
Yeah.
He talks about connecting with a universal intelligence or an inner wisdom. How does that fit into his whole framework?
It's interesting, right? And he's very clear that this isn't about any specific religion or belief system.
Right.
He's really talking about tapping into this source of wisdom and creativity that's available to all of us, regardless of our background.
Okay.
And he suggests that this universal intelligence is actually the source of those thoughts, the ones we were talking about earlier,
Yeah.
the ones that just kind of pop up seemingly out of nowhere.
So it's like when we quiet our own thinking, we kind of create the space for something much larger to flow through.
Precisely. And he even suggests that this is how we access like true inspiration, those aha moments where brilliant ideas just seem to download from somewhere beyond our conscious mind.
That's wild. It reminds me of those times when, like, I'm struggling with a problem and then the solution just kind of pops in my head when I'm doing something totally unrelated.
Yes.
Like taking a walk or in the shower. It's like the answer just appears out of nowhere.
Exactly. And Nguyen would argue that this is not just coincidence. It's because when we're in that state of non-thinking, we open ourselves up to receiving those insights from this universal intelligence.
So it's like tapping into like a well of collective wisdom or like a field of infinite possibilities.
That's a great way to put it. And to help us tap into that field, he encourages us to ask ourselves some pretty powerful questions.
Like what? Give me an example.
He suggests like pondering questions like, if I had infinite resources and absolutely no fear, what would I create? Or what would do if I knew I couldn't fail?
Those are some big questions. I love how they really push you to think beyond like your own perceived limitations.
Right. They kind of bypass all those limiting beliefs that our thinking minds tend to get, stuck on.
Yeah.
And one more like really crucial point that he emphasizes, this isn't just about like personal gain.
Sure.
He really believes that when we tap into this universal intelligence, we not only find peace and fulfillment for ourselves, but we also become conduits for positive change in the world.
Okay, no, that's inspiring. So if someone listening is like, all right, I'm in, I want to give this non-thinking thing a shot, where does Nungveen suggest they begin?
He actually offers a ton of practical advice, from simple things like, creating a non-thinking environment to really diving deep into things like, reframing our relationship with our emotions and understanding the thought patterns that drive our less than helpful habits.
It sounds like a lifetime's worth of exploration. But before we jump into some of those more specific strategies in our next episode, what's like one key takeaway, one golden nugget of wisdom that you think is essential for our listeners to remember from all of this?
I think the most important message, the one that really resonated with me, is that our natural state is one of peace.
Okay.
And it's always available to us.
Right.
We don't have to earn it, achieve it, or even understand it fully.
Okay.
All we have to do is create space for it to emerge by quieting that like relentless chatter of our minds.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've kind of laid the groundwork here, explored the what and the why of non-thinking. But how do we actually put this into practice in our busy, often chaotic lives? So we're ready to dive into the how of non-thinking. Where does Nguyen suggest we even begin?
He actually offers this really practical framework for incorporating non-thinking into our lives.
Hmm.
First up, he suggests taking a close look at our triggers.
Triggers? You mean like what sets off those thought spirals in the first place?
Exactly. He calls it doing a trigger audit. What factors in your life, your environment, your routines tend to kind of push you into that fight or flight mode?
So it could be anything from that extra cup of coffee to a cluttered inbox to like, doom scrolling on my phone for an hour before bed.
It's different for everyone, right? But once you pinpoint those triggers, you can start experimenting with ways to minimize their impact.
Okay, that makes sense. So less coffee, more calm. What else?
Well, he talks about something he calls creating a non-thinking environment, basically surrounding yourself with things that promote peace and well-being.
Ooh, I like this. We're talking like calming colors, house plants, maybe a phone-free zone sign for my desk.
Exactly. And it's not just about your physical space either. He also talks about creating a non-thinking digital environment.
Hold on, a digital detox for my mind. Now you're speaking my language. Tell me more.
Think about it. The apps you use, the people you follow online, the news you consume, dude, they generally contribute to a sense of calm or chaos.
That's a really good point. I'm definitely guilty of letting social media kind of stress me out sometimes.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the whirlwind,
Right, right.
but curating your digital diet can make a huge difference.
So less doom scrolling, more digital zen.
Yeah.
Got it. But what about something like work? I mean, most jobs aren't exactly designed for non-thinking, are they?
He actually dedicates a whole section to this.
Yeah.
He suggests an exercise. Try dividing your work activities into 2 lists.
2 lists. Okay.
I was
Well,
listing.
one list is for all the tasks that you have to do that leave you feeling drained, depleted. The other list is for the work activities that energize you, the stuff that, lights you up.
So figuring out what I dread versus what I actually enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And then gradually over time, you try to shift your focus more and more towards the things that are on that energize list. Ideally, aiming to spend at least 80% of your time on tasks that align with, your passions and strengths.
It sounds amazing, but also much easier said than done in some jobs.
Right. He acknowledges it's not always easy to make these drastic changes overnight.
Yeah.
But even small shifts can make a big difference. Maybe you can delegate certain tasks or have a conversation with your boss about tweaking your responsibilities. The point is to just become aware of where you're directing your energy and start moving in a direction that feels more aligned.
It's that intentional direction, that conscious choice that really matters.
Exactly. And this is really important. Even when we're living in alignment with these principles, we're still human. Life is going to throw curveballs, We're going to face challenges. We're going to experience those negative emotions.
So how do we deal with those inevitable bumps in the road without spiraling into like a thought tornado?
This is where Nguyen's guide to overcoming what he calls destructive habits comes in really handy.
Okay.
He frames it as a process of understanding the thought patterns that fuel those habits in the first place.
So it's not just about willpower or like forcing ourselves to change our behavior. It's about getting curious about the why behind our actions.
Exactly. He encourages us to ask ourselves, what am I feeling when this habit takes over? What am I telling myself in those moments?
So instead of judging myself for, let's say, procrastinating on a big project, I might realize that I'm actually terrified of failure.
Yeah.
And that's what's really driving the procrastination in the first place.
Exactly. By shining a light on those underlying beliefs, we can start to gently challenge them. And then here's the really cool part. We can actually start to replace those old limiting beliefs with new, more empowering ones.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about how our emotions are kind of like an internal guidance system.
Yes, and this is crucial. When we actually pay attention to our emotions, even the negative ones, but we do it without judgment, they can offer incredibly valuable clues about where we're out of alignment with our true nature, with what really matters to us.
It's like those negative emotions are a signal to just hit the pause button, examine our thoughts, and choose a different path.
Precisely. They're not something to be feared or suppressed. They're an invitation to get curious and really explore what's going on beneath the surface.
I love that reframing. It's not about being positive all the time. It's about learning from the full spectrum of human experience.
And of course, there will be times when we slip up. We fall back into those old patterns. That's inevitable. But here's the good news. It's not a failure. It's just an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to start again, with this renewed commitment to cultivating that peace and well-being.
It's a continuous journey, not a destination.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's what makes this whole approach so liberating. We're not striving for some unattainable state of perfect non-thinking. We're simply practicing the art of coming back to the present moment over and over and over again.
That's a beautiful way to put it. So as we wrap up this deep dive into non-thinking, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with today?
If our natural state is one of peace, love, and joy, as Ngin so convincingly argues, then what if suffering isn't a necessary part of the human experience at all? What if it's optional? What becomes possible for you when you choose to step out of that cycle of overthinking and into the freedom of your true nature?
That's definitely something to ponder, a question worth exploring.
Great.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.